This is part 3 of a video series about NZG's Liebherr LTM 11200 mobile crane model, and it covers the 54 metre luffing jib set. The kit comes in a fairly large Liebherr branded box, and inside there's a set of instructions, and there are two trays which are packed with the many parts. The top tray includes the metal pendant bars which are already pre-assembled, and also most of the other smaller parts, including a blanking plate for putting over the end of the telescope, an adapter for joining the jib to the boom, a smaller lower capacity jib head. Also included are some smaller parts, and these include tools for making the connections on the extension kit, a couple of bags of metal handrails that fit to the luffing jib pivot, some jib sections, and there's also a bag full of small nuts and bolts, and there are plenty of them, which is a good thing because you probably lose some, and a small single axle dolly for the jib tip. The bottom tray contains most of the larger parts, including the jib sections. There's a small tube of super glue, which is probably intended for fixing the hand railings, the complicated luffing jib pivot section. There's an intermediate heavier lifting jib section, and in the corner is the luffing winch, which contains an extra drum with half the thread on it. The instruction sheet is professionally produced in German and English and includes a parts list. It's pretty good, but probably wouldn't answer every question that an inexperienced collector would have. We will start with just a simple configuration, which is adding a mast extension to the lattice mast provided with the base model. And one thing you can do to avoid having to unreeve and re-reeve the model is to clamp the ropes as shown here, using in this case some Meccano pieces. You just clamp top and bottom at the pulley points, and if you apply those clamps fairly tight, it means that the rope is fixed onto the pulleys and it won't bounce off as you move the parts about. With the hook secure, it's just a matter of disconnecting the nuts and bolts to release the top of the mast section. You need to make sure it doesn't just drop off when you take the last bolt out, but it's fairly secure on this model. And then you can take the top off and then just lower it down. And this is a general way you can move things that are already reeved by clamping the lines. Then it saves a lot of work having to re-reeve the model when you re-erect it a little bit later. It's all easy after that. You just insert the additional mast section that you want and do the screws up in the normal way, and then put the tip back on, and once that's bolted up you can undo your clamps, and then you've very quickly achieved an extended mast section on the base model. We'll now assemble the full luffing jib, and this is a much bigger exercise. We've seen the removal of the top 4 telescopes in a previous video in this series, and the kit includes a blanking plate that just pops over the hole. The luffing winch is a nicely made part, but it is actually the most difficult part to fit. Firstly, as on the review model, you sometimes find that a fixing hole may be actually solid because a piece of metal and paint has blocked it over. Well, the thing to do is just to push that out with a pointed tool. It's usually not very solid, and then you can clear the hole. The screws used to fix the luffing winch are a little bit different from the rest. They're silver and they are self-tapping screws, and before you install the winch, just make sure that all the holes are clear and that the screws go through. And then it's best on the crane model itself to clean out the fixing holes, remove some of the loose paint with a screwdriver, and then actually try to screw in the screws before you try to fix the luffing winch. The reason for all this is that the screws are a very, very tight fit, and so any way that you can kind of loosen them up before you fix the winch is a good thing to do. Having inserted the winch section, you can do the screws up as far as you can, but the ones at the front are tricky to get in unless you've got 1/50 scale fingers, so a little trick is just to put a piece of blue tack or plastic putty on the end of the screw head, push the screwdriver into it, and then you can just use that to position the screw, put it in, drive the screw and remove the putty. When you've fitted the winch section, give it a good pull just to make sure it's firmly fixed before it has to carry the load of the luffing jib. Unfortunately, NZG couldn't fit all of the required thread onto the winch drum, so half of it's wound onto a spare drum, which I've just removed. What should happen is that the luffing bridle, as you see here, should be resting in the top of the luffing winch assembly, and it should all be reeved up for when it's transported. but you can't really do that because the thread can't fit on the luffing winch drum. The next thing to do is to assemble all of the various jib sections and bolt them together. You need to get them the right way round and the right pieces in the right place, so you need to look carefully at the instructions to see what parts go where. It takes quite a time to bolt up all of the various pieces, including the pendant lines, but it's best to do most of that assembly before you attach it to the model. It is best, however, to fit the bottom sections separately to the boom top because it's hard to get the nuts and bolts in, but when that's fitted you can then put the whole of the rest of the jib on, and it's possibly a two-person exercise just to do that and bolt it up. And once it's fitted you can open up the A-frames on the pivot point, and you see that the luffing bridle actually hooks over onto the end of this piece with V-shaped hooks on the end, because that represents the erection configuration with the jib pointing downwards towards the ground. With the jib now attached to the crane, the next thing to do is to make the guy rope attachment, and that's just a standard thing of connecting the guide wheels to the pendants and tighten them up, and then tension the system up a little bit to make it rigid. The next lengthy operation is to reeve up the luffing jib gear. The way we're going to do it here is with the jib up in the air, so we're using a piece of string that will tie off to hold the jib temporarily whilst we do the reeving. So you need to do that and pull the A-frames down and lift the jib up, and this again is probably a two-person operation. As you begin to lift the jib up, there's a hydraulic cylinder and ram which you need to connect up kind of at the halfway point and make sure that they're together, so that when you continue lifting the jib that they're fully connected. And if you forget that, NZG have helpfully pinned the ram so you can remove it and install it in the cylinder jacket later. Once you raise the jib to a high point, you can tie off your temporary connection so that it holds the jib with the string, and then the luffing bridle is just hanging ready to be reeved up with the rope from the luffing winch. To start the reeving you need to remove the storage drum from the model, and don't cut the piece of thread between the two drums because you need to remove all of the thread from the storage drum and then use the free end to start the reeving process. After that it's a matter of good eyesight and patience as you follow the reeving diagram, running the thread from one pulley to another in sequence. It's time consuming, and like any reeving operation it's likely to be frustrating. But when you've done you can tie off neatly on the link that's provided, and then the reeving operation is completed. With that done we can remove the temporary strap that held the jib during the reeving process. Next up is to add the various metal handrails that are supplied, and on the review model these just clipped firmly into place. And finally we can reeve the winch line to the hook, and that just goes over pulleys in two of the A-frame sections on the pivot and up and over the top of the jib to the hook. And with that the assembly is complete. Now we'll have a quick look at some of the details we haven't already covered. The plastic blanking plate is a worthwhile addition and nicely made. The luffing winch has good detail within the casting, and it includes metal handrails and walkways. The A-frames are highly detailed with mesh walkways and more metal handrails. All the pulleys are metal and the jib sections are well made and perfectly straight. Also the small brass bolts are not obtrusive against the Liebherr yellow. The main operating feature of the kit is the working winch, and you operate that using the supplied tool, and it pushes in and releases a very positive action brake, and you can see here in a speeded up piece of film that the jib can luff up very smoothly. Another less obvious feature is that the jib sections have all been made accurately so that they can store inside each other, and that means that they make very realistic transport loads if you've got a suitable truck on which you want to put them. So you can just insert them all like that, which is exactly how it's done on the real machine, and then with a suitable flatbed truck as shown here you can load the sections and get an impressive looking display piece. Another feature is the dolly axle, which clips into the end of the jib and is used during erection. A great feature of the kit is the variety of configurations that can be built. So for example we can take the boom tip off of the luffing jib and then rig the crane with a heavier hook from the end of the jib. Also you don't have to have a luffing jib either, you can just have an extended fixed jib, and that looks pretty impressive on the model as well. One unsupported feature on the model is that the very tip of the jib could be removed and fixed to the top of the telescopic boom, but two of the connections are friction rivets, so it's not been designed to be removed easily. In the next video in the series we'll add the 36 metre extension kit to get the maximum size model shown here. The 54 metre luffing jib kit takes a few hours to fully assemble, but it's very well engineered and looks great on the model. The detailing is very good and many different configurations can be built. It is a highly recommended kit.